I never expected to wake up one morning and find police-grade spike strips bolted into my own driveway, but that's exactly how my so-called quiet life turned upside down. I moved here hoping to park my trusty truck in peace until Karen, the HOA president, decided it was her personal mission to banish me and my vehicle. At first, I brushed off her petty warnings and bizarre fines as standard busybody behavior, but when my tires started showing up mysteriously deflated and the spike strips appeared, it became clear. This was a power trip, not a simple neighborhood squabble. Then came her most brazen stunt of all, having my truck secretly towed in the dead of night. Little did Karen know I'd installed cameras after the first sign of sabotage, and I had a lawyer on speed dial, ready to slam the brakes on her twisted campaign. Before we jump in, please take a second to subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. Trust me, you won't want to miss how this story ends, and I'd love to see which corners of the world are tuning in. I'm Ray, a 50-year-old guy who spent most of his life working on carpentry, home renovations, and small-scale hauling jobs. I love what I do, and my main tool isn't just a hammer or a power drill, it's my trusty truck. Mind you, this isn't some massive, over-the-top monster rig. It's just a solid SUV pickup combo, the kind that can carry enough lumber for my projects while still being comfortable for everyday driving. A few months ago, I decided to leave the hustle and bustle of the city behind. I craved a calmer environment, a place where I could fire up my grill on weekends, blast my classic rock playlists, and enjoy the crickets at night without worrying about loud traffic. After searching high and low, I found what felt like the perfect spot. A modest house with a big driveway, surrounded by quiet roads and open skies. The property needed a little TLC, and that suited me just fine. I had my truck for hauling materials, my toolbox, and a vision for creating my personal sanctuary. The listing mentioned an HOA, but I assumed it was minor stuff, maybe rules about fence heights or lawn maintenance. I'd never had trouble with that kind of thing before. Surely no one would have an issue with a single truck parked outside. Oh, how wrong I was. My first week in the neighborhood was peaceful. I got to know a few friendly folks who waved when I drove by. The roads weren't deserted, but they were far from congested. Perfect for a quiet life. Then, one afternoon, I was backing my truck into my driveway, positioning it to unload a few sheets of plywood for a weekend DIY project, when I heard this loud, authoritative clearing of a throat behind me. I turned around. Standing there was a woman who looked to be in her mid-50s, with meticulously styled hair that hadn't budged an inch in the breeze. She was dressed in a neat blouse, clutching a clipboard tight against her side like a soldier holding a rifle. She had a thin, forced smile that radiated anything but kindness. "Hello," she said, her tone clipped. "I'm Karen, the president of our homeowners association. I've noticed you've been parking that vehicle outside every day." She gestured toward my truck as though it were a rusted junker leaking oil everywhere. In reality, my truck was clean, well-maintained, and certainly not an eyesore. "Good to meet you," I said, trying for a friendly tone. "I'm Ray. I just moved in. Yes, that's my truck. I use it for work." Karen pursed her lips. "We have guidelines in this community," she began, tapping her clipboard, "and oversized vehicles are strongly discouraged. You should consider parking it elsewhere, maybe a storage facility or a different lot outside the neighborhood." "Wait," I said, baffled. "My driveway is on my property. It's not a commercial truck. Why would I need to store it somewhere else?" Karen sighed dramatically. "I'm just letting you know. Our residents prefer smaller, more traditional vehicles. If you have an issue, you can attend the next HOA meeting." Then she offered a tight grin. "Or you can comply with our standards. It's your choice." With that, she marched off. I stood there, plywood sheets halfway off the truck bed, wondering what on earth I'd gotten myself into. The next few days were tense. Every time I turned the key in my ignition, I felt like Karen was lurking around the corner waiting to pounce. Sure enough, small notes started appearing. Notice #1. My truck was supposedly too big for our narrow roads. Newsflash, nobody else had trouble passing by. Notice #2. The HOA demanded it be parked out of sight. Notice #3. A bizarre claim that the noise of my engine was violating community peace. Even though I wasn't revving it up like a hot rod, I tried to be considerate, keeping my truck's movements minimal late at night or early in the morning. But Karen's notes kept coming. One evening, I saw her stepping out of her little golf cart, snapping photos of my license plate. When she noticed me watching, she hopped back in and sped away, leaving a cloud of dust in her wake. I confronted her the next day, politely asking why she was taking pictures of my truck. Her only response was to flash her clipboard and say, "I'm documenting HOA infractions. If you're not violating any rules, you have nothing to worry about." That was the first time my patience wore thin, but I still held back, hoping reason would prevail at the upcoming HOA meeting. Walking into the community center for my first HOA meeting, I tried to keep an open mind. Maybe once I explained my situation, my truck wasn't some monstrous vehicle, it was just a standard SUV pickup style, everyone would understand. Karen stood at the front, flipping through a thick binder of community guidelines. A handful of neighbors were scattered around on metal folding chairs. Some people nodded at me politely. Others looked away, clearly uncomfortable. "Tonight's main agenda," Karen announced, "is the ongoing issue of a large vehicle parked consistently in our neighborhood." She shot me a pointed stare. "We've had multiple complaints." I took the makeshift podium and explained how my truck wasn't obstructing the road, wasn't leaking fluids, and wasn't generating any unusual noise. Several people in the room exchanged glances. I got the sense that not everyone shared Karen's obsession. But Karen was relentless. She waved her binder. "Our guidelines clearly state that residents must preserve the aesthetic harmony of this community. Large trucks, off-road vehicles, and any autos deemed commercial in nature are not permitted. Period." One neighbor timidly raised a hand. "Actually, I believe the rule says commercial vehicles used primarily for business. But Ray seems to just have a personal truck. I don't see how that—" Karen cut them off. "We'll take this under advisement," she snapped, narrowing her eyes at me. "But for now, we must uphold standards." The meeting ended without any resolution. As I headed out, a few neighbors whispered apologies, saying Karen had a track record of nitpicking every small thing. They shrugged, clearly fed up but unwilling to confront her directly. I left feeling uneasy, yet determined not to let her bully me out of my own driveway. Over the next couple of weeks, I tried to maintain my routine while ignoring Karen's antics, but she ramped things up. A giant fluorescent sticker appeared on my windshield one morning declaring the vehicle unauthorized, subject to towing. I spent a good 15 minutes scraping it off, cursing under my breath. Late-night tire troubles. Twice, I found my tires partially deflated in the morning. Not fully slashed, but enough to cause me a headache before work. Each time, Karen stayed just out of reach. When I saw her cruising around on her golf cart and confronted her about the sticker, she shrugged dramatically, claiming, "It must be one of your neighbors who's concerned about policy violations." I didn't have proof of who was deflating my tires, but the pattern was too obvious. This was harassment. I documented everything, snapping photos of the stickers, the tires, and the suspicious footprints around my driveway at night. I even consulted a lawyer friend, Don, who lived in another state. He advised me that the HOA had limited power if the street was public and my driveway was private property. "Keep everything on record," he told me. "If she crosses the line, we'll have a good case." I figured a few petty stunts were as far as she'd go, but I underestimated Karen's determination to get rid of my truck. One chilly morning, I stepped outside before dawn, planning to head out early to pick up supplies for a home renovation job. As I approached my truck, something caught my eye on the ground. At first, I thought maybe a piece of metal had fallen from a passing car. Then I realized it wasn't just one piece. It was a long strip of twisted spikes, partially embedded in the gravel, gleaming in the faint light. My jaw dropped. Spike strips! I'd seen them on TV. Police used them to puncture tires in high-speed chases. But why on earth were they in my driveway? I inched closer and spotted heavy bolts anchoring these strips to the ground. Whoever installed them knew exactly what they were doing. My heart pounded with anger and shock. This was no childish prank, it was downright dangerous. I pulled out my phone and took dozens of photos and videos. Then I called the local sheriff's department. An officer arrived, carefully inspected the strips, and shook his head in disbelief. "I've seen these used on highways," he muttered, "but never installed on private driveways. This is a serious offense, property damage, reckless endangerment, maybe more." He asked if I had any suspects. I said, "I can't prove it yet, but I have a strong suspicion it's my HOA president, Karen." The officer took down a report, told me to remove the strips once he was done documenting them, and suggested installing surveillance cameras. "If it happens again," he said, "we'll have a better shot at proving who's behind this." That night, with my driveway finally clear, I tried to sleep. But my mind wouldn't stop racing. If Karen was indeed behind this, what else might she do? Sure enough, removing the spike strips wasn't enough to stop the madness. 2 mornings later, I walked outside and found a thick steel cable strung tight across my driveway, padlocked at both ends, with a bright red sign that read, "No trucks allowed, HOA enforcement." I stared at it, utterly dumbfounded. Was she even allowed to do this? The driveway was clearly on my property. The cable anchored into 2 large metal stakes hammered deep into the ground. It would take serious effort to remove. I snapped more photos, called the sheriff's department again, and waited for an officer to arrive. By the time he showed up, I'd already cut through the cable with a bolt cutter. I kept it as evidence, of course. He filed another report, shaking his head at how quickly things had escalated. But the next day, Karen outdid herself. I woke up to cinder blocks lined across the entrance of my driveway, like a makeshift barricade, spray-painted with the words, "No parking." Some of the blocks even had metal rods stuck in them for extra reinforcement. At this point, it felt like something out of a dark comedy. I used the winch on my truck to drag them aside, took more pictures, and vented my frustration to my lawyer friend, Don. "She's crossing every line," Don remarked over the phone. "This is overt trespassing. You absolutely need security cameras." So I installed them. Motion-activated cameras covering the driveway, the side of my house, and even a discreet one near my mailbox. Little did I know how crucial that footage would become. My new cameras were up and running for less than a week when I got the footage I needed. One night, around 2 a.m., my phone buzzed with an alert from the camera system. Half asleep, I opened the live feed. My eyes went wide. Karen was back, this time with 2 men. One of them carried a large toolbox. The other lugged what looked like a piece of metal. As I zoomed in, I realized they were installing a fresh set of spike strips, bolting them down with what appeared to be industrial-grade fasteners. It was surreal to watch them in real time, under the dim glow of a flashlight, basically committing a crime right on my property. My heart pounded. Part of me wanted to rush out there and confront them, but Don had warned me it was best to gather evidence and let law enforcement handle it. So I sat recording every second, building an airtight case. The next morning, I went out and saw the newly embedded strips, more secure than ever before. They'd even poured a bit of quick-setting concrete around the edges to make removal harder. I called the sheriff immediately, forwarding the camera footage. This time, the deputy didn't just come to take notes. He was armed with the actual video of Karen and her helpers in the act. We marched over to her house, and he demanded she remove the strips immediately. Karen tried to feign ignorance. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, folding her arms. The deputy played the footage on his phone, showing her stepping out of her golf cart, directing the men on where to put the spikes. Karen turned ashen. "Ma'am," the deputy said firmly, "this is private property. You have no right to install anything there. This is considered vandalism and could be reckless endangerment. Remove them now or face arrest." Karen reluctantly agreed, but not without glaring at me. Under police supervision, she spent hours with her 2 sidekicks, chipping away at the concrete and unscrewing the bolts. By late afternoon, the driveway was clear again, at least physically, but I sensed a deeper tension swirling just beneath the surface. For the next couple of days, life seemed to calm down. Maybe Karen realized she was teetering on the edge of serious legal trouble. I went about my business, used my truck for some supply runs, and tried to breathe easier. Then, one Sunday morning, I stepped outside, mug of coffee in hand, and froze. My truck was gone. The spot where I always parked it was empty. At first, I thought maybe it had been stolen, but there were no shattered windows, no signs of forced entry. Then, a horrible suspicion slammed into me. Karen. She'd threatened to get rid of my truck before, but would she dare to cross the line into outright vehicle theft? I raced back inside and checked my camera footage. My stomach churned as I watched the time-stamped video from 2:47 a.m. A tow truck rumbled up to my driveway, lights off. Karen's golf cart was right behind it. She got out, pointed at my vehicle, and after some quick maneuvering, the tow truck driver hooked my truck to the winch and hauled it away. Karen stood there with a smug grin, arms folded, as if she'd just executed the perfect plan. My hands shook with fury. This wasn't just spike strips or cables anymore. This was grand theft. I dialed the sheriff in record time, practically yelling into the phone. Within half an hour, a patrol car pulled up. It was the same deputy who'd made Karen remove the spike strips. I showed him the footage. He stared in disbelief. "This is blatant vehicle theft," he said. "You have it on camera, so it's a slam dunk. Let's find your truck." We quickly called around to local towing companies and impound lots. Sure enough, we discovered that a private lot on the outskirts of town had received a large SUV in the early hours, courtesy of a tow truck that claimed it was illegally parked in an HOA community. The deputy and I drove straight there. The lot owner looked nervous the moment we arrived with a police escort. I showed him my ID and vehicle registration, plus the camera footage. He shook his head, muttering that he'd been told by the HOA president that it was an abandoned vehicle on community property. The deputy laid out the facts. No one can legally tow a vehicle from private property without proper authorization. The lot owner realized he'd been duped. He opened the chain-link fence and there was my truck, dusty but otherwise unharmed. I hopped in and drove it out, feeling a surge of relief and anger all at once. We headed straight to Karen's house. The deputy knocked on the door, more forcefully this time. I could see Karen peek through the curtains, trying to decide if she'd run or hide. Finally, she cracked the door open, a fake smile plastered on her face. "Karen," the deputy said, his voice firm, "we have evidence you orchestrated the illegal towing of Ray's vehicle from his private driveway. That's vehicle theft." She tried to launch into her usual spiel about community guidelines, but he held up a hand. "Ma'am, guidelines do not supersede state law. You had no authority to remove his car. We have clear video evidence. I'm placing you under arrest for grand theft." Karen's eyes widened. She sputtered, "You can't arrest me. I'm the HOA president." The deputy wasn't having it. He cuffed her wrists while reading her Miranda rights. Karen thrashed, screaming that she'd sue everyone, including the sheriff's department. Neighbors stood on their lawns, filming with smartphones, whispering in disbelief. I watched her melt down with mixed emotions, anger, relief, and a strange sadness that it had come to this. All over a truck and a driveway, for goodness sake. But Karen had finally overstepped in a way she couldn't undo. Over the next several weeks, the legal system ground into motion. Karen was formally charged with grand theft auto and additional counts related to vandalism. My lawyer, Don, coordinated with the local district attorney's office, sharing the mountains of evidence I'd gathered: photos, videos, police reports, witness statements. At her hearing, Karen tried to argue that she was enforcing HOA standards, but the judge didn't buy it. This was a criminal act, plain and simple. She ended up with a hefty fine, a probation sentence, and a stern warning that any further infractions would land her in jail. I didn't revel in her misery, but I did feel a huge weight lift off my shoulders. Justice had been served, and my property and sanity were finally safe from her obsessive meddling. After the dust settled, neighbors started opening up about Karen's history of harassment. Some had been fined for trivial matters, like having the wrong shade of paint on their mailbox or planting too tall bushes. She'd apparently been riding this power trip for years, until my situation blew the lid off her behavior. I occasionally wonder what might have happened if I'd never installed those cameras. Would she have gotten away with it? Would I have spent months, maybe years, locked in a battle of he said, she said? The mere thought makes me shudder. I'm just glad I stood my ground. While I never asked for a war with the HOA, I wasn't about to let someone bully me, especially over something as basic as parking a regular SUV in my own driveway. Looking back, The entire saga feels like a cautionary tale. Sometimes the biggest threats to our peace come disguised as concerned neighbors who think they have the right to control everyone around them. HOA Karen believed she could bend the law to her will, but the moment she towed my truck, my personal property, from my driveway, she sealed her fate. If you enjoyed this story, please be sure to subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and drop a comment letting me know what city you're watching from. I love reading your comments, and I'm curious if you've ever faced a similar nightmare with a neighborhood busybody. Let's share some stories and maybe help each other out with advice on dealing with Karens everywhere. Justice can prevail even against the most stubborn HOA Karen. Here's wishing you fair treatment and a spike-free driveway, always.